Chris, the Battle of and Evacuation of Dunkirk is one of the key events of World War II and probably of the 20th century. What fascinated you about it and made you want to make a movie?
Like most British people, I've grown up with this story. I don't even remember the first time I was told about the events of Dunkirk. As a British person, you get this sort of mythic, almost fairy tale version of the story. So it's sort of in your bones, and then as I learned more about it, I realized that the reality of it, the nuanced, human, real story of what happened at Dunkirk is actually more impressive than the simplified version. About 20 years ago, Emma and I went with a friend who had a small boat, and we made the crossing to Dunkirk. At about the same time of year, the evacuation had taken place. And the channel did not cooperate. The seas were very rough, and it was incredibly challenging and arduous and felt very, very dangerous. And that was without people dropping bombs on us. You know, we weren't heading into a war zone. And so my respect and admiration for the people who made that crossing to assist with the evacuation, and my interest in the real events, what had happened at Dunkirk, was absolutely cemented. And it sort of stayed with me as a project, a story that I felt at one point I'd like to turn into a film. I'd like to make the film that hasn't been made, the contemporary film for today's audiences about this great story. But I wanted to wait until I had the tools at my disposal to do it justice, because it's a very, very large story.
You're right, it is a large story, it's a great spectacle that is very entertaining to watch, but at the same time it's intimate, and you make the audience feel like they're in that Spitfire, like they're in that boat. Was that important for you, for the movie to have that two aspects, the grandeur but at the same time the intimacy level?
I refer to Dunkirk as an intimate epic. You know, it's an epic story with huge events, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people involved. It involves air, sea, land, all kinds of things. But to me, intimacy and subjectivity in storytelling was the key to how to approach this tale. It's too big a story to encompass in sort of, I think, conventional movie making. What I wanted to do was put the audience on the beach with the guys who were there and allow the audience to experience some of that intensity, some of that fear, some of that suspense. Because for me, Dunkirk is a survival story. It's a race against time, and therefore the language of the suspense thriller and this very subjective sort of present tense filmmaking is what I really wanted to do. The story is divided into three different points of view, really, essentially land, sea and air. And that came about as a result of me wanting to give the audience a coherent picture of what the larger events of Dunkirk were, but without ever stepping outside that subjective mode of storytelling. I really wanted to have the audience always in the suspense and the suspenseful present tense of the situation. I didn't want to cut to generals in rooms pushing things around on maps or whatever. I wanted to stay in the moment, stay in the suspense of what's going on, but jump between different points of view, show different aspects of the same event, one after the other. So in that way, hopefully the audience can get the benefit of a wider perspective, even as they're imprisoned within this subjective storytelling.
How much the film is visually stunning. To achieve that perspective, grand and intimate that you were commenting before, how was the experience of shooting the movie in IMAX, and what do you think that adds to the whole cinematic experience?
We shot the film in IMAX because it's the highest resolution format, the best color reproduction of any imaging format ever devised. And so what it gives you, particularly in a cinema where you can project an actual film IMAX print, and we'll have several of those going out to the world, and 70mm prints and so forth, what it gives you is a clarity and an immediacy to the imagery that really puts the audience there, with the vast screens and the extremely crystal clear images and the large sound that you get on this format. It really helps me as a filmmaker to create this immersive experience for the audience.
Extraordinary cast you have here, and a very interesting choice. You have some seasoned actors, you have actors that you've worked with before, and you have some young talented actors. Some of them have never actually been in a film before. Can you talk about the whole casting of the movie?
Well, in casting the film, one of the main things that I didn't want to do is observe the traditional sort of Hollywood convention of casting older actors, 30-year-olds as 18-year-olds. The reality of how war is fought is we send very young kids into battle. We send 18, 19-year-old kids in. And I wanted to cast people actually of that age so the audience would have that immediate fear for them, that immediate empathy with these kids who are there on the beach. And so we went through a fascinating process of sort of open auditions, looking at drama schools and people who didn't yet have agents and all of that. And over days and days, we put together different combinations of talented young actors and saw who would fit which part, and had them swap parts and try different combinations. It's a very old-fashioned form of casting that I hadn't really ever been able to do before. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think we made some really remarkable discoveries. I think Finn Whitehead, who's the lead of the film, is an extraordinary new talent. Tom Glencarney, Barry Keoghan. I mean, there's some terrifically talented kids in there, mixed together with a sort of more experienced anchor in each storyline. So you have Mark Rylance on the boat. He's just one of the greatest actors of his generation. Kenneth Branagh at the end of The Mole, supervising the loading of the boats, who's obviously an extraordinary talent. We have Tom Hardy, we have Cillian Murphy, actors I've worked with before and loved working with, who came along and helped out to just give some real grounding and some real support to these young guys who had never been in a film before.
You're not only combining land, sea and air, you're also combining 3 different times. Things that occur during 1 hour, things that occur during 1 day, and things that occur during a week. And you managed to do that, playing with time, going back and forth. Can you talk about that? Because I'm sure that must have been a challenge for a filmmaker.
Well, I was looking for a structure that would allow me to retain this intimacy and subjectivity, but give me this wider view of things. And so you start wanting to see things from the land and from the sea and from the air. You want to be on the beach, but you also want to be on a civilian boat coming over, which would have taken about a day, a long day. And you want to be in the cockpit of a Spitfire, flying over the battle. And they had about an hour's flying time in combat, over Dunkirk. And so it became necessary to take different time scales for each timeline so that they could intercut throughout the whole film. So that 1 hour of intense combat in the Spitfire stretches over the whole film. It's an epic hour for that pilot. The people on the beach are dealing with this incredible contrast between absolute intensity and fear and boredom. They're just there, stuck, not knowing what's going to happen. And that not knowing is part of, I think, what creates the real suspense and the real fear. But that's running at a different time scale. So you have a week, you have a day, and you have an hour, all cross-cut and meeting at a particular point in the film.
How was it to fly on one of those planes? How was the experience?
Flying in a Spitfire was one of the great experiences of my life. It's really tremendous.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall carry on the struggle. We shall never surrender. ダンケルク